Every day across America, millions of people see mourning doves without truly noticing them. They sit quietly on fences. They rest on telephone wires. They perch on rooftops. They wander through peaceful backyards, hidden behind suburban homes. Sometimes they appear alone. Sometimes they arrive in pairs. Sometimes they seem to do almost nothing at all. That may be why so many people overlook them. Unlike the brilliant red northern cardinal, unlike the noisy blue jay, unlike the clever American crow, the mourning dove rarely demands attention. It does not flash bright colors. It does not perform dramatic displays. It does not seem to be competing for our admiration. Instead, it simply exists, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. And yet, what if that quiet appearance is hiding something extraordinary? What if the birds we ignore most often are living lives far more complex than we imagine? What do mourning doves actually do all day? Where do they go after they leave the backyard? Why do they return to the same places again and again? Do they remember certain homes? Do they recognize familiar landscapes? And could they be paying more attention to us than we realize? Those questions may sound unusual, but if you spend enough time watching a backyard closely, you begin noticing patterns. A pair of mourning doves appears on the same fence several mornings in a row. A familiar bird returns to the same corner of the yard week after week. A nest appears in a shrub where another nest stood the previous year. At first, these things seem like coincidence, but nature rarely depends on coincidence. Nature depends on patterns, and the life of a mourning dove is built almost entirely around them. Patterns of safety, patterns of food, patterns of shelter, patterns of survival. For a mourning dove, the world is filled with uncertainty. A hawk can appear without warning. A cat can emerge from beneath a hedge. A sudden noise can transform a peaceful garden into a dangerous place. Every decision matters. Every movement carries risk. That is why mourning doves spend so much of their lives observing. They watch the sky. They watch the ground. They watch the trees. They watch the movement of shadows. They watch other birds. And sometimes they watch us. Most people never notice this because mourning doves observe in a very different way than humans do. They do not stare. They do not approach us directly. They do not seem curious. Instead, they quietly collect information, day after day, season after season, until an entire backyard becomes familiar. The bird learns where food can be found, which trees offer shelter, which corners remain quiet, which places become dangerous. Over time, the backyard becomes more than a location. It becomes a map, not a map drawn with roads and boundaries, but a living map built from experience. Every safe branch, every feeding spot, every hiding place, every source of water, each detail becomes part of a larger picture. And perhaps the most surprising part of that picture is that people eventually become part of it too. The homeowner who fills the feeder every weekend, the woman who waters flowers every morning, the man who drinks coffee on the porch, the children who run across the lawn after school. All of these routines become part of the environment, part of the information a mourning dove quietly stores away. And that raises a fascinating possibility. If these birds are constantly observing, constantly remembering, constantly learning, how much do they actually know about the world they share with us? The answer begins with one of the most remarkable abilities a mourning dove possesses: memory. If you spend enough time watching backyard birds, you eventually notice that they rarely seem lost. A mourning dove does not wander randomly through the neighborhood. It often flies directly toward familiar places, a favorite fence, a familiar branch, a trusted feeding area. This happens because birds rely heavily on spatial memory, the ability to remember locations and use those memories later. Every successful experience strengthens that memory. A safe place becomes safer. A reliable food source becomes more valuable. A familiar backyard becomes worth returning to. This is especially true in suburban America, where many backyards remain relatively unchanged for years. The same fences, the same gardens, the same shrubs, the same patios, the same routines. For a mourning dove, this stability is incredibly valuable. The more predictable the environment becomes, the easier it is to survive. And survival has always been the most important goal. Yet memory alone does not explain everything. If it did, mourning doves would simply return to familiar places and nothing more. But anyone who watches them long enough begins to notice something unusual. They often seem to arrive before food appears. They appear before seeds are scattered, before the feeder is filled, before any obvious reason for their arrival exists. How is that possible? The answer may have less to do with prediction and more to do with observation. A mourning dove does not need to know the future. It only needs to remember the past. Imagine a homeowner who fills a feeder every Saturday morning. The first few times, the bird notices only the food, but over weeks and months, it begins noticing something else. The opening of the back door, the sound of footsteps, the appearance of a familiar person carrying a container. Then the food arrives. The sequence repeats again and again. Eventually, the sequence itself becomes information. The bird no longer responds only to the food. It responds to the pattern. This ability to recognize patterns may be one of the most important survival tools a mourning dove possesses, because nature is filled with patterns. The arrival of dawn, the changing of seasons, the movement of predators, the routines of human beings. All of these create predictable rhythms, and predictable rhythms make the world easier to understand. Perhaps this explains why some birds seem strangely comfortable in certain backyards, not because they have become tame, not because they trust humans in the way people trust one another, but because they have learned which environments are predictable, which places remain calm, which routines rarely bring danger. Over time, familiarity creates confidence. A familiar fence feels safer than an unfamiliar one. A familiar garden feels safer than a new location. A familiar backyard becomes part of a larger map of survival, and this map continues growing every single day. Every observation adds another detail. Every successful experience strengthens an existing memory. Every safe morning reinforces a familiar routine. That process never truly stops. Even when a mourning dove appears to be resting quietly on a wire, it is often still gathering information, watching, listening, learning. The longer researchers study birds, the more they discover how important information really is. For a small bird, information can mean the difference between safety and danger, food and hunger, life and death. That is why mourning doves pay such close attention to their surroundings. And that attention extends beyond landscapes and feeding areas. It extends to other birds as well. One of the most overlooked parts of a mourning dove's life is its relationship with the larger bird community around it. At first glance, they seem independent. A bird sitting quietly on a fence appears completely alone. But the reality is often very different. Every backyard contains an invisible network of activity. Robins searching for worms, cardinals moving through shrubs, chickadees visiting feeders, finches gathering seeds, sparrows exploring hedges, and somewhere among them, mourning doves quietly observing everything. When one bird discovers food, others notice. When one bird reacts to danger, others notice. When one bird suddenly takes flight, others notice. Information moves through a backyard in subtle ways, not through words, but through behavior. A sudden movement, a change in posture, the direction of flight. These signals may seem insignificant to us, yet they can carry valuable information for other birds. In many ways, a backyard functions like a constantly changing community. Every bird contributes information. Every bird benefits from information, and mourning doves are part of that hidden system. This is one reason why activity often increases after people leave. The yard becomes quieter. The birds become more active. The invisible social world begins to reveal itself. A mourning dove lands near a feeding area. Another appears nearby. A robin crosses the lawn. A cardinal emerges from a shrub. Life that seemed absent only moments before suddenly appears everywhere. To human eyes, it can feel almost magical. But what we are really witnessing is a world that never stopped moving. A world that continued even when nobody was watching. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of all. The backyard does not become alive when we notice it. It was already alive. The birds were already there, observing, learning, responding, living lives every bit as complex as they needed to be. And the more closely we watch, the more we begin to realize how much has been happening around us all along. And perhaps that realization changes the way we see these birds forever. Because the longer we watch mourning doves, the harder it becomes to think of them as simple visitors. They are not merely passing through our backyards. Many of them are returning to places they already know, places they have spent weeks observing. months learning, perhaps even years remembering. A familiar backyard can become part of a mourning dove's life in ways most people never imagine. The same fence, the same tree, the same patch of lawn, the same garden path, the same source of water. Season after season, these places become woven into the bird's understanding of the world. And while individual birds may come and go, the patterns often remain, generation after generation, year after year. That may be why certain backyards seem to attract mourning doves again and again. Not because there is anything magical about the location, but because it consistently offers what birds value most: safety, predictability, familiarity. For humans, familiarity often creates comfort, and perhaps in a different way it does the same for birds. A place that has proven reliable becomes worth remembering. A place that has provided food becomes worth revisiting. A place that has offered safety becomes worth trusting. Over time, those memories shape future decisions, and future decisions shape entire lives. Think about the mourning dove you may have seen this morning, the one sitting quietly on a fence, the one resting on a wire, the one standing beneath a feeder. How long has that bird known your neighborhood? How many seasons has it watched pass through those trees? How many mornings has it witnessed the same backyard waking up beneath the rising sun? We often assume we are the observers, the ones paying attention, the ones watching nature. But perhaps the relationship is more balanced than we think, because while we watch birds, birds are watching the world around them too. Every day they gather information. Every day they refine their understanding of the landscape. Every day they learn which places deserve another visit. And that process continues whether we notice it or not. The quiet mourning dove on a backyard fence may appear inactive, yet inside that small bird exists a lifetime of accumulated experience. Memories of safe places, memories of dangerous places, memories of storms, memories of seasons, memories of landscapes that have become familiar through repetition. That is the hidden life most people never see. Not a life filled with drama, not a life filled with spectacle, but a life filled with observation, adaptation, memory, and quiet intelligence. Perhaps that is why mourning doves have become such enduring residents of American backyards. They have learned how to live alongside people without depending on them completely. They have learned how to adapt without drawing attention. They have learned how to survive in a constantly changing world while appearing almost unchanged themselves. And maybe that is what makes them so fascinating. The greatest mysteries in nature are not always hidden in remote forests or distant mountains. Sometimes they are sitting quietly on the fence outside your window, waiting, watching, listening, living an entire life most people never stop long enough to notice. The next time you see a mourning dove in your backyard, pause for a moment. Look a little closer. Ask yourself a simple question. Is this bird seeing the yard for the first time? Or is it returning to a place it already knows by heart? How many memories exist behind those quiet eyes? How many familiar mornings have shaped the decisions it makes today? Because once you begin asking those questions, the ordinary backyard suddenly feels very different. The fence becomes more than a fence. The garden becomes more than a garden. And the quiet mourning dove becomes more than just another bird. It becomes part of an ongoing story unfolding all around us. A story of memory, a story of survival, a story of familiarity. A story that has been taking place in American backyards for generations. And now we would love to hear from you. Do mourning doves visit your backyard regularly? Do you see them on fences, on rooftops, under bird feeders, or perhaps in a favorite corner of your garden? Share your experience in the comments below. And the next time a mourning dove appears nearby, take a moment to watch carefully, because you may discover that the bird you thought was simply passing through has actually been quietly studying the same world you call home for far longer than you ever imagined.